Hello, hello. Tere. That's as far as my Estonian goes. I hope it's okay. Good to see you here tonight. Welcome to Fotografiska and this celebratory night when we actually open 2 exhibitions. We're going to celebrate one tonight and one on Saturday. So I hope you can come back as well. My name is Johan Wikner. I'm the Global Director of Exhibitions, and I've had the great pleasure of working with Henriette and talking with you about the show. And tonight we're going to have a little conversation around your new exhibition. You haven't seen it yet, I think, unless you've sneaked upstairs, but you will have the chance after this talk, of course. I hope you go upstairs and see all the shows that are on. Just to give them a brief presentation of your work from my point of view. Your work, to me, explores many different things. Perception, identity, and the body, male and female, through a surreal and very layered lens, literally, actually, as you will see. You use mirror and distortions and reflections, and you create images that sort of challenge the viewer, us as an audience, on what we actually see. So I was hoping tonight we could have a more of a conversation. I'll have some questions. I hope you prepare some questions. If you have any thoughts that come up while we speak, there's a chance for you as well to ask afterwards. So apart from Henriette, who's here tonight, we also have Annike Lamp, who during the day, this is like a superhero thing. During the day, you're an EU civil servant based in Luxembourg, but by night, you're a writer and a translator and a cultural critic, and you have deep experience and a cultural curiosity, both when it comes to the visual arts and fashion. So it's a very great mix here. I hope we can delve deep into that. But I wanted to start, Henriette, with you. Of course, say welcome and thank you for being here in Tallinn. Congrats on the new exhibition.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
How do you feel? It's a sports question, but the exhibition upstairs is called Kaleidoscope, and you've worked very close to put together the artworks that you show here. So I wanted to start by asking, what does this exhibition mean to you? What does Kaleidoscope mean, and what is the meaning of the artworks that you've compiled?
Well, first, thank you for having me here. I'm very happy to be here in Tallinn. And the exhibition was first showed in Stockholm, so this is the second time it showed, and it's really cool to have the chance to show it one more time and also to bring it back together. And the layout of the exhibition is slightly different, so it's really cool to put it out there again. But Kaleidoscope is an exhibition that is, well, it's a collection of my work that I made during the last 10 years. And it's a mix of portraits, self-portraits, still lifes, and also about the nude body. So I feel like it kind of is a new take on all the classical art genres that I'm trying to show. The meaning behind the word kaleidoscope, well, that refers to my use of mirrors and this like surreal world that I try to drag the viewer into.
And we'll get more into that as well, of course. But Annike, I wanted to ask you kind of the same question. You've had the chance to see the works today and experience the exhibition. What does it mean to you? What do the artworks bring about in you, if you reflect on that?
Yeah, I feel very lucky to have seen it in person already. You are all in for a treat. Because I had looked up the artwork beforehand, knowing that I would have to be here. But seeing them in person and seeing them here curated so well, it's a completely different experience. So first of all, it's just visually stunning. So for me, I admit that I find it much easier to connect to art if there is this clear visual impact. If it gets extremely intellectual and conceptual, I sometimes find it less easy to have that connection myself. And I also think it makes it easier for different people to relate to the art, because you mentioned yourselves this conversation that your art has with art history and different concepts in art history, like still lives, which I love. It's for me just a great format for art. Or you have a work that references and is kind of in a direct conversation with Dali, but not everybody has this background. So with your art, you can enjoy it whether you have this cultural background or not. You can either just enjoy the colors, the forms, this initial stunning visual, and then you slowly come to realize that maybe you didn't notice everything right away, that actually in this beautiful blue, orange, yellow picture you have mold, or that this figure that you're looking at is not exactly in the position that you originally thought it was. So you also mentioned that the layers that you have, that just initial visual, beautiful layer, then you have all those references, and then your own personal references on top. So not only what you would gain, know from art history, the Greek influences or what have you, but also your personal connections to your family, taking your own personal symbols and kind of making them relevant for others. For me personally, you have one series about the universe and space and time, and as somebody who is obsessed with quantum mechanics and astrophysics, I found this particularly interesting. There is a British Iraqi drag queen, Glamru, who has written about how quantum mechanics is queer and how it has helped them to understand their personality, because quantum mechanics is, constantly in contradiction with the reality, and things can be in two places at the same time, and they can be two different things at the same time. So this for me is just personally very interesting to see how you've kind of captured this in this really wonderful series.
I think that summarized very good all the things you can find in art in general, depending on your experience. Who you are as a viewer means that you see different things in different pictures. And you are very open with that as well, Henriette, that you invite people in to make their own interpretations. But it's interesting with the, I've written down a hard word here, intersectionality. But what I mean by that is, the different experiences people bring when viewing the artwork, but also what you have brought in photographing them. Like you referenced art history, and there's fashion. You're doing a lot of fashion work as well. But you're also a medical doctor. You have one foot in art and one foot in the medical science, which is two different sides of the brain, pretty much. You work with both. And I think you beautifully mentioned that your photo sessions are like miniature experiments, that you see them as scientific experiments. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Yeah, it's really interesting for myself as well, like making my work. I feel like I'm playing a game with myself, kind of. I think maybe my background in medicine has taught me a lot about the scientific methods, and actually I see many references between both science and art. Like in science, you have a theory of something and you want to test it out, so you make experiments and try to collect the data, and then maybe you write a science paper on that. But in art, you also test out ideas, or at least that's what I feel like I do. So I will have an idea, and then I will bring sort of the ingredients, my mirrors, maybe some oranges, a model, and some other weird stuff, bring it out in nature, and then kind of experiment with those ingredients and see what comes out of it. And working with mirrors, I always try to challenge the final result. I try to bring new perspectives, literally, into what I'm creating. So for me, that's always challenging as well.
And does the one part of your life work influence the other? Does your art influence your medical work, or the medical work influence the art?
I think, yeah, both probably. Never consciously, but as an artist, you always draw inspiration from whatever you see and experience in life, and just subconsciously, I think that comes into your art in so many ways. I didn't really think much of the fact that I was working a lot with the body until I realized, well, it's actually quite similar to working with the body as a doctor, at least to me, because as an artist, the way that I work with the nude body, I have respect for the individual, and there's a mutual respect between me and the model, and a trust. And then again, when I do the photo shoot, the body becomes shapes and forms and colors that I use to create my artworks. And as a doctor, maybe there's a patient coming in with their knee that's hurting, and you have to figure out what is the problem with the knee. So you examine the knee in an objective way, but still with a respect for the individual patient. So in that sense, I think, at least to me, the way that I look at the body is a bit similar.
And Annika, you mentioned before your interest in astrophysics. Astrophysics is the word. And you have a deep interest, you've mentioned, in natural and social sciences. Do you find any other clues in Henriette's different works, the photographs or the videos that relates to other sciences from your point of view?
Yeah, I was thinking about medicine as well, but that was probably influenced by our talk earlier. So I have this advantage over you that I've seen the exhibition and I've spoken to the artists. So I probably, I was conditioned by this conversation as well. But also kind of botany, or almost natural sciences, or, you have a lot of elements of nature in your work as well. Be it water, be it flowers, be it fruit, which is also fascinating. I find it, I mentioned still lifes earlier, and I've always found it such a fascinating genre, because on one hand, it's in some ways the easiest and most basic thing you can do. You just paint, in traditional art, you just paint some fruits, or you paint some flowers, or you paint some dead animals and fish in the case of old Flemish masters. But it's never only that. And when I look at your work, you have always this different undercurrent there, either something slightly disturbing or worrying, or something that gives a different angle, or in some cases that you don't immediately even realize. I was asking about one work that you had, what's that? And it turned out to be a still life, but it looked from afar almost like a fantastical castle or something like that. I couldn't tell what it was. So it's, also the way you picture the body. You mentioned yourself this potential, the link to medicine, and especially you have this 3 artworks about the male body. They're quite striking. It's just a male figure on blue background, which is, clinical is maybe too strong a word, but it's very simple and very stunning in that sense. And this is where I was thinking about this connection with medicine that you mentioned. So there is a lot there, not only natural sciences, but I would say psychology, and this, you've mentioned identity several times, this theme of fracturing and multiplicity and different angles and distortion, which I also find fascinating. Just as a symbol, I think it's interesting. It's visually interesting, but it's also related to those topics that I think we all kind of need to grapple with in the world, where on one hand we all need to maintain some sort of a coherent self, but at the same time have multiple interests, sometimes multiple jobs, different elements of us that we somehow need to reconcile. So it's a rich body of work, which I think probably also, I saw it fast and quickly, so there is, I'm sure, much more there that I managed to glean at such a quick viewing.
Yeah, there is much to find there, and my background is in art history, and I think it's fantastic to see all the references you are making, but also looking forward, because and I want you to think a little bit about this, how you use photography and the camera as a tool rather than as an art form in itself. You use it to create images, which is very it's a contemporary way of using photography, is what I want to say. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that, and also just how you are actually creating these images that are behind us here. Because like you mentioned, Annika, you see something, but you don't really understand what it is. They're real and they're surreal at the same time. You don't really know what is true, or what you mean, or what I am supposed to see. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. I think sometimes I think of myself kind of as a scenographer, or someone like creating a scene, because it's always staged what I do. Of course, the feelings are real at the moment, but everything is like created. So I feel like the camera becomes sort of a tool that kind of captures that moment. Yeah, sometimes when people don't know what kind of photography I do and that I say I do photography, then they're like, oh, okay, so do you take portraits or like do you go out in the street and photograph? And I always have to explain like, no, I create like a universe and then I capture it with the camera. Which is, yeah, I feel like I'm creating my own kind of fantasy world, sort of. And then when I photograph someone, they show parts of themselves, but they kind of also act in my fantasy world at the same time. But the photos are always created. Well, I don't use Photoshop to create the distortions and reflections, but at some point, actually, someone when I was hired for a job, and the client was like, "Yeah." So they actually told us that you're so good with Photoshop. So can you just do this and this and this? And I was like, "No, actually, I'm not. I mean, I'm okay with Photoshop, but it's not really the point." I think it make it look more real because it was actually created in reality. So like everything you see in the images is a picture of what it looked like to me in real time. So it's always created, with the reflections and the distortions. And I'll bring out like big, huge mirrors. Some of them are flexible mirrors, so that they can make like distorted images. And in some of the videos, you can also see that the distortions are moving. So I will be moving like the mirrors to create those distortions.
It's really fantastical, actually, to see how you work in different medias in the moving form as well upstairs. Another related topic, of course, is fashion and fashion photography. You've done a lot of work for fashion brands and magazines. How much do they want to influence? Can you keep your artistic view and presence and wish and will, or do they? Can you handle them in the same way, or do you have to work differently in fashion?
I actually really enjoy working with fashion, both like brands and also magazines. Sometimes they have certain things that they want to include in the image, and I think to me that's kind of a nice challenge because then it makes me think more creatively and to come up with new solutions and ideas that I will maybe then use in my personal work later on. But of course, sometimes they have limits, but I think usually they would hire me also because that they like the type of work that I do, which is quite distinct. So they also hire me because that they want that style. So I'm usually very lucky to be able to do my own kind of work, even though it's something commercial.
And Annika, you've written a lot about fashion as well, and fashion in terms of identity and roles and expectations perhaps within the industry, but also in the larger field towards customers, and how people are boxed in sometimes or driven to personas. Do you see those kind of things also in Henriette's work, or are they more liberated from those kind of aspects?
Yeah, I actually have to say that you put it better than I would have myself, but I did feel liberated from those categories actually when looking at your work. I fully understand why fashion would be interested in working with you. As I said, it's just your work is visually stunning and so rich. So this is exactly the type of thing fashion likes to take and kind of use for their own purposes. But when I was walking through the rooms upstairs, I felt in a completely different world and really kind of separated from these games that fashion plays with identity and other things. This doesn't mean that I'm like looking down upon fashion. I find fashion very interesting exactly for those reasons, that it is kind of an intersection of many different things. It is the visual arts, the visual side, but it's also business and commerce. It is the identity. It is power structures, the things we want to present and show about us, or in some cases, finding ourselves through the plays or things that we do with our visual appearance. So this is in its own very interesting thing, and I think your aesthetic, for the lack of better word, can be something that fashion brands, naturally gravitate towards. But I think the work upstairs, it's its own word and its own world, and kind of, as you said, like your own little fantasy world that I feel is like a refuge in a way where I felt that I'm safe from the horrors and dangers of outside world and fashion.
That's a beautiful way of putting it, and hopefully more people will feel similar. I wanted to ask Anniki as well, maybe this is a slightly personal question, but on these topics of expectations and authenticity, how do you handle those? Do you feel a tension between that in your roles as both a public voice and also a critical writer of many topics?
Yeah, I find authenticity a tricky concept for many reasons, on many levels. I think, the most fundamentally already, whether this is possible at all, whether some sort of absolute authenticity is possible or desirable even, because it also implies that you have some sort of fixed self that you then express consistently in an authentic way. Which I haven't, at least in my own case, found to be true, that it's possible to be absolutely coherent and consistent at all times. What I do strive for is, kind of avoid, knowingly being inauthentic. So not deceive in the way I exist in the world. But even that, sometimes I don't think it's so straightforward. Let's say that you are a young immigrant woman looking for a job, and you dress like a conservative, boring person to get that job. Is this wrong? You are not expressing your true identity necessarily in the most authentic way, but this is what I would describe this as a survival tactic rather than being inauthentic. And also as a public person, I mean, I'm not as public as many others, but I think my problem sometimes maybe comes from the fact that I work in this relatively rigid, public institution by day, where you have certain rules in place for good reasons, but it, for example, even practically makes different roles a bit difficult, because, for example, if I want to write a review or I want to come to an event, I need to go through certain procedures. I need to ask for permission. Sometimes this permission is not granted. In my case, it generally has been. So, it is not so easy always to switch between those roles. And of course, then you have people who believe that this shouldn't be done at all. Who follow my blog to see how much time I spend on this, to make sure that I'm not spending taxpayers' money and time on doing something that I shouldn't, which I find offensive, not because they think I shouldn't blog, but because they think I'm so ineffective, because I'm extremely fast and thorough in my work. So, there are these different aspects. I think in my case, they are all still relatively easy to navigate. For many other people, they are much more difficult, and there, I think, at some point comes also a question, how much vulnerability do you owe the world? As I said, I always try, not to present myself, at least not in an inauthentic way, maybe not bearing my whole soul at all times, but not purposefully hiding. But again, for me, I can afford confessing, I talk a lot about books, and I write a lot about books, and I can afford confessing that I enjoy monster romance now and again, because my livelihood doesn't depend on it. But if you're somebody who works in a high-level literary establishment and this is your livelihood, can you afford being authentic in those questions? So there is, I think there are many tensions there, and sometimes I feel that if we demand complete authenticity from people, this is also not necessarily fair.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, deep questions, interesting topics, but I also want to just shoot you a few questions quickly, each, that you can answer, not in one sentence, but quite short. Are you ready? Henriette, what drew you to this mirror and distortion technique?
It was a fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen called The Snow Queen. And there's okay, it cannot be a short answer, sorry. There's like a short story of a mirror made by the devil, which shatters in 1,000 pieces and falls into the eyes of different people. And they see the world distorted. And and they see the ugliness in the world. So that's what first made me use the mirror, actually.
That's great, and then it's in almost all of your art. It's fantastic. Next question was how you create this, but you already talked about this. How did you select the works for this show in particular?
Yeah, interesting question. Well, I guess it's a process of wanting to show a little bit of everything, and you kind of want to show the highlights of the different series that I've been working on. I guess they're all kind of coherent, but yeah, the highlights, I guess, and how they fit each other.
And there's also 2 brand new pieces we should mention in this exhibition that you show for the very first time. A sculptural element just as you enter the exhibition, and then a video piece in the center with a beautiful singing choir that you'll experience. Okay, last quick question to you. Are you a doctor first or an artist first?
An artist first, because I think you're born an artist and you study to become a doctor.
Good question. Good answer. Good answer. Okay, Anniki. Coming more from a world of words, perhaps, what drew you to visual imagery and culture?
I think the visual world is self-care for me, because the literary world, or the word on the page, is my native country, and the art is where I visit and where I can just enjoy as well. I think often if we work with words, you also, and if you write yourself, when you read, you start thinking about, how to do it yourself. You start analyzing all the time, which, it's natural and it just happens. With art, I can just enjoy, and sometimes I really feel, discussing with the lovely Fotografiska people, that sometimes when I'm in Tallinn, I come here. I come for half an hour, and I feel it replenishes the soul for a while, and just calms me down, and just allows me to enjoy without over-intellectualizing every single thing.
And what does an EU civil servant do by day?
Oh, that's the most difficult question. Just for background, I started out as a communication professional, and I did public policy communication for many years, more than 20 years. Now I've ended up, and nobody is more surprised than I am, in the European Court of Auditors. And I am not an auditor by nature, but now I have this role where I help the auditors who control the use of EU money to kind of present their work in a way that is also comprehensible for other people, and with my boss, trying to guide them towards topics where we think that there is a social demand for something, that we need to see what is happening. So a lot of my work is actually still a lot of writing and reading, but now from more of this public value angle, and making sure that your money is spent wisely and not wasted.
And then a similar question to you then. Which role do you prefer, the civil servant one, or the more, well, you write in both, but the more critical writing about other topics?
I don't have such a direct answer. That I think for me, I need both, or I need all of them. I've found that if I have periods in my life where I've been forced, for example, to focus on work only, it is very difficult for me. I have had work periods where, I get hardly any rest, but I need to find some time for something else. Otherwise, I think we'll go insane. When I started my blog actually during a time where I was very busy at work. So I woke up early in the morning. At 7 o'clock I blogged. Then I went to the office. I worked until 2 o'clock in the morning, woke up, started blogging again. So it was not that I had so much time on my hands that I found something nice to do, but it was more that I needed something else to survive in a situation where you are in a very constrained situation work-wise, and need to dedicate so much to it that you need to replenish somehow. You need something else in your life. So for me, it's not that something first and something second, but that I actually need those different things to be a whole person.
Thank you. So back to your work, Henriette. You mentioned earlier, and we see here, you work a lot with people, of course, bodies, models and friends and dancers. Sometimes different people become the figures in your images, but they're not portraits. It's more use of the body as a sculpture, perhaps, or as part of your artwork. Can you tell a little bit on how you see that, how you use the body in your images?
Yeah, I think I find it very nice to work with people that I already know, because there's already established a bond of trust between me and the model. And it's also really nice just to hang out with an old friend and just chat and have a good time while you do the photo shoot. But yeah, to me, well, I explained a little bit earlier, but to me it's like looking at shapes and forms, so it becomes a bit, I guess, a bit less about the body while I do the shoot, and more about like forms and shapes. And I think about like the composition and everything. Sometimes I even like forget that the model maybe has been in a position for some time, and they're like, "Can we take a break?" And and I'm like, "Oh, of course." But I also forget about my own like physical needs. Like sometimes I'll be standing on my knees for an hour, and when I finish the shoot and I stand up again, I almost cannot stand because it hurts so much. But I didn't really notice in the process. Well, it was funny shooting with my sister because she was a lot more direct than a lot of my friends. She was like, "When are we done? Can we please go home now?" Yeah. But I enjoy working with friends and family.
And you photographed both women and men, mostly women, and you have a series that is more dedicated towards the female body and the identity. Is there a difference, like working with women and men in this situation? And were you interested in finding out different things, or perhaps the same thing?
I think it's a lot the same working with men and women. I think, well, I started working with the female body because I found it quite interesting to experiment on how can you express female sexuality, female power, and just female beauty, and kind of like combine all those elements in an image. And how can you make an image interesting even though it's a nude? Because I think a lot of photographers use the nude image as kind of a way to make the image interesting, and sometimes that can be type of a boring image. People will look at it just because there's a person without clothes. But how can you make that interesting even though there is a person in the nude, if that makes sense? So after experimenting with the female body, I felt that it would be interesting to bring the male nude into my world, because I thought it could be interesting to portray the male body also from a feminine perspective. In the art world, there's a long tradition of male artists and photographers portraying the female body. So I thought it could be an interesting experiment to turn that around and be a female photographer or an artist portraying the male body. But I think I came to realize that for me, it doesn't really matter so much if it's a man or woman that I'm portraying, as long as it's there is like this mutual respect for each other, and the person is engaged in the project. But I think it adds something extra, I guess, to the whole body of my work, that they're both men and women, and then I guess also it becomes more about the body than maybe like the female body. So I think it adds a new layer.
And Anniki, from your perspective, and perhaps more of a fashion perspective towards photography, I'm thinking, do you see a difference from your point of view and from like fashion's point of view in how women and men are portrayed, and oftentimes in imagery? And do you see a correlation with Henriette's images or an opposition?
Oh, there is so much to unpack in
Sorry.
how fashion sees women and how it sees men, and how, you know, it's often men who dress women, not women themselves. One thing I just wanted to say in reflection to Henriette's words, I think, you know, the way you have, I mean, I always enjoy work that is about women, but I was so, not surprised, but let's say pleasantly surprised to really enjoy how you portrayed men. I think there is this female gaze in the most gentle and lovely way possible in how you have done that. And it was really fascinating to see. We were discussing earlier with some lovely Fotografiska people that they used to have, they had this Tom of Finland exhibition years ago, and there you have this hypersexualized way of looking at men, which is kind of almost complete opposite to how you have done this. So it's really beautiful to see. And I think this is, I almost think something that we need more these days than we need female empowerment, because I feel, this is at least a topic where we have had this conversation for a long time, and I feel some progress has been made. Obviously, we're not there. There's much to do, but at least I feel, the conversation can be had, and many people have, felt liberated. I think men are in many cases even more trapped in these patriarchal boxes, and how they're supposed to be, how they're supposed to look, how they're supposed to feel. Ideally, not at all. So I think maybe we need this, even more desperately than we need, different ways of looking at women. But coming quickly back to fashion, I think there as well, fashion is also so multifaceted. I think one thing which has been really positive in recent years, or with the advent of internet, is that you have more voices, and you have more diversity, and you have more ways of being a woman, both in terms of more the identity as such, and then how you visually express it. I think this is extremely positive, but I think recently there has also been a certain backlash. There was this initial optimism, also together with social media. We felt that we're breaking through of the iron fist of Anna Wintour, and now we can all post things, and they are not gatekeeping everything anymore, and it's not only a couple of big brands in the big capitals that everything is so much more diverse and liberated. And it really did feel like that for a while. Now I feel that we are kind of stalling in some ways, slipping back. For example, with body diversity, I don't think things are going that great. Also, I think the political climate in many places, and especially with the US, the MAGA aesthetic that we see coming through, I hesitate to criticize any way that women choose to present themselves to the world, but I do fear that it represents something that is not healthy for anyone, not men, not women, not the society as a whole.
Thank you. And yeah, you talked about soft masculinity back to the conversation earlier, Henriette, in the space, and I thought that was a beautiful way of viewing those images of men that you have up there in a beautiful way. I wanted to quickly just touch back on art history a little bit. Because these questions also go into art, of course. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of, in photography, men photographing women, but also in art history, men painting or having the ability to paint. And it also, so I wanted just to reflect on that together with the interest you have in art history, because you bring out these old techniques and various sort of forms in your artworks. There's the still life, there's the distortion in many different ways. How do you find that inspiration? And is there a specific type of artist or history in the past that you are drawn to or looking towards or most inspired by?
I think inspiration just pops in my mind, and I get an idea and I want to test it out. But of course, I'm also inspired by looking at old artworks. I think especially old or ancient Greek sculptures, I think, are super inspiring. We have a museum in Copenhagen called Glyptoteket, which is super beautiful. You see these old Greek sculptures, and I was really drawn to the postures of the men and women that are portrayed, and I kind of wanted to bring that into my own world as well. And I think it also felt important to bring those kind of postures into my work, because in photography, the way that people are posed is many times close to how people are portrayed in fashion, and I wanted my work to, well, I guess, of course I also work with fashion, but I wanted it to be more close to the classical art world, or at least draw inspiration from that, and then of course sometimes mix it with fashion. But I just, I guess for me also, like working in art, I think it's just interesting to experiment with old techniques and old styles, And that's also why I wanted to experiment with the still life and portraits and the self-portrait. So I kind of wanted to bring all the elements into my way of doing it.
I see that now that you mention it. I'm thinking about, like, you know, how ancient Greek and Roman statues are often broken today, right? It's like they're more body parts than actual human people, and that actually quite relates to how people are distorted and fragmented in your work as well.
Yeah, I never thought about that, but good point.
See, it brings out new questions. Yeah. So I've asked a few questions. I wanted to ask Annikki, do you have any questions for Henriette?
Yeah, you asked my question actually earlier, because I was wondering about this difference between working with fashion brands, for example, and doing pure art, if you want to call it like that. I have many questions, trying to find the most interesting one. I am interested in the way you work with people and bodies. Is there a difference for you working with women and men, and how? And also, do you have a different idea in mind when you work with women and when you work with men, or is it like a conceptually similar place that you're coming from? It's just that the gender is different.
I would say it's very similar working with men and women, and conceptually it's coming from the same place. So for me, it's more like a body. It could be a man, it could be a woman. It doesn't matter that much, but then again, of course it does, because I wanted to bring the female perspective on the male body into my work. But creating the work, I think, for me, it doesn't matter that much. Well, yes and no. But I think it's very similar. Yeah.
And also, culturally speaking, do you notice, is there any difference how people in different parts of the world receive your art? Is there, I don't know, I don't fully know in how many places you exhibited and so on, but I don't know, do conservative places react differently? Do the north and the south, do you see a difference there? Do you shock some people, or is everybody's reaction as gushing as mine?
Well, I guess in some more conservative parts of the world, maybe they think it's like a bit too provocative with nude images. But I haven't experienced that so much here in Europe, because I think we're quite used to seeing the nude body. But in terms of the style, I think I found that the Italians apparently like my work a lot. I don't know, they just kind of vibe with it. And then in Denmark, it's like, I think they maybe don't always understand what I'm doing. It's like they have a view on photography which is a lot closer to documentary photography. I think that's more like the norm in Denmark, to work with photography from that point of view. So I think they're sometimes a bit confused, like, is she a fashion photographer? Is she an artist? Is she a doctor? Like, what is her identity? Yeah, but I think, like, on the international scene, it's not that big of a deal. But in Denmark, like, I feel like they want to put me into a certain category, but they cannot really do that, so they don't know what to do with me, I guess.
One more. I just got curious. Is there something that you have, you would like to do but haven't managed for some reason, that, I don't know, that it's technically difficult, you haven't figured out yet, or you don't have the exact model that you want? Do you have something that you're like itching to do, but haven't managed to do yet?
Yeah, I think like on the long term, I would like to make like a movie, like what do you call it, like
a feature film.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. That's just something that I always thought I wanted to do, but I don't know what it should be about yet. And I also wanted to. Because I've done some research as well in medicine, in psychiatry. There is this link between mental illness and creativity, actually, which is super interesting. Some genes that can lead to creativity can also lead to mental illness, and there's so much that we don't know about mental illness. But I just find it quite fascinating that there is this link. So actually, I did a small research project with a psychiatrist where we interviewed 10 artists to see if there would be any, any link between the way that they were thinking compared to people diagnosed with schizophrenia, or bipolar disorder, depression, or whatever. And we did find some small links, which I find really, really interesting. And like we also talked about earlier, if you are an artist, you need to think out of the box. And some of the research that I've been reading about also indicates that it's better to have a little bit of spice or a little bit of these genes than to have nothing of it if you want to be creative. So, but on the long term, I think it could be really cool to create some kind of like lab or research place where artists and scientists can work together and collaborate. Like on the long term would be really cool as well.
That's a good question. It's always interesting to hear what's up next. Do you, Henriette, have any questions for Anniki?
Yeah, you already also kind of asked them, but I can ask something similar. Yeah, I'm just really interested in how did you cope with the fact that you have multiple identities? Because I think myself, I found it quite frustrating in the beginning. When I was in the beginning of studying medicine and also wanting to choose the art pathway, I was really struggling, like, how do I present myself? Like, how do I see myself? And how should other people categorize me? I think now I've come a bit more to terms with it, but I'm just curious, how did you come about that?
I think there are elements of that I don't have a problem with at all. I just generally refuse to believe that people fit into boxes neatly. There aren't any people I know who have only like one facet and nothing else. So I actually find these people who have strange combinations of things the most interesting and fascinating people. So I never had a problem with the fact that I'm a little bit like that myself. So I always thought that this is like a normal way of being and should be generally encouraged. What I find challenging is that if you're interested in everything, it makes it more difficult to focus. To a certain extent, it's not a problem. Things feed into each other, especially as I was working mostly with communication. Obviously, it helps if I read a lot, if I am exposed to different things. It also helped me in my professional life. But you do need to make choices. I mean, especially as you get older, you have a family, you have responsibilities. You cannot physically be interested in everything and do it at a certain level. So you need to prioritize and need to make choices. This I find extremely difficult, and often I am still delusional, and I'm deluding myself that I can do all those things. And even if you're very fast and very dedicated, you cannot do everything. You cannot be an expert in everything. And this is something one needs to make peace with, and I haven't fully done that. What is interesting, I don't know if it's interesting for other people, but I think sometimes women struggle with, being a woman in male field. This is a current meme as well, and for a reason. And this is, again, strangely maybe something that I haven't struggled with. I've done and worked in some very masculine fields, in energy policy, in fiscal policy. I did my internship very young for Estonian Railways. That is the most masculine work culture that you can imagine, in early 2000s, where it was still basically an appendix of the Russian railways, just coming out from that. And I've never had a problem with this. I took it as a challenge. I felt very comfortable there. Even if I was one of the very few women, I just thought, okay, it was for me a reason to prove myself and show that I can work twice as hard and twice as good than you guys can. I have been more hesitant actually in more traditionally female fields. I've put myself more into a box in terms of, let's say, for example, literally criticism, where I feel more like, who am I? And, it always felt something, high up for me. That's something that only extremely intelligent people who have read every single book in the world can do. So it's, I think in general, I am at peace with those multiple identities. I enjoy it. But I also am in a privileged place in a sense that, I'm an able-bodied, conventional-looking, now earning a decent salary person who doesn't want, who can make those choices, who has help, who has a partner who is very supportive. So I think it's also, it can look very, very different to people who do not have this sort of supportive framework, and who struggle much more, and who are maybe at the start of their careers and need to make much tougher choices. So I am very conscious also of the fact that the fact that I haven't struggled, for example, in masculine environments too much, it does not mean that others have not struggled. And I think this is something, it's more of an Estonian conversation, but I feel that sometimes women who have reached the top, and they have put in the work, and they have done it, they find it difficult to understand that others may have struggled for reasons beyond their control, because they have done it, and they know it can be done, and it's difficult for them to understand that it's not the same for everyone. So it's a long long answer to say that, and I think it's actually the fun thing in life to put those pieces together, but of course sometimes it's difficult as well.
Thank you both for great questions and answers. And I want to open up to you guys in the audience. If anyone has a question or a thought to share, please raise your hand, and our lovely colleagues will bring you a little microphone so that we can all hear you, if that is okay.
Thank you. It was really interesting to listen to all of you, but you already went on such a philosophical way, so I'm coming back to a more maybe technical side. So maybe if you could delve into how your process works, not so much when you're out there and taking photos and making images, but more how do your concepts come together in your head? Do you sketch them out, or do they pop in your head, or how's that part of the process?
Well, they usually pop in my head just when I'm, like cleaning or going for a run, or like doing something like manually, kind of, or like riding my bike. And then, I collect whatever I think I need for the photo shoot and go out there and shoot the images. And then afterwards, I look through all the images, and I will pick the image that kind of speaks the most to me. Usually it's the image that sort of gives off something that I have not created, or at least I feel like I didn't create it. It sort of like gives me something extra. And this I really had to learn, because I'm also a control freak, so I like to be in control. But I also learned that you need to look for the things in the images that sort of are uncontrollable, or like gives you something that I didn't feel like I created it. It was like maybe like a feeling, or a stroke of light that hit the model at a certain time, or something like this, that will give the image an extra dimension that sort of like came from above, or and so I'll just go through the images and pick the one that feels right. Because it's like when you're an artist, your only compass is to go with your feelings. So what I will be touched by is probably what other people will be touched by too. So you have to go with that, I think. And then when I pick the image, then I also use Photoshop, but not to create the effects, but more for like, maybe there's a scratch on the mirror, or I also like to highlight certain parts of the image, which I may think needs more focus, for example, the hair or the eyes, and make sure that the colors look clear and nice, stuff like that. Yeah.
Any other questions? Thoughts? We've talked about so many different things, so everybody's confused and full of impressions. Okay, I I have one question, quick then, for each of you before we wrap up. Anniki, you can choose, because I guess you do a million different things, but what are you working on next? One interesting thing.
I need to write a book. I just need to get my act together and start doing it after procrastinating for a long time. I also have to choose which one, because I have several that I would like to write, but yeah, that's my big thing now.
Looking forward. And Henriette, what do you hope the viewers and the audience will take with them when they visit your exhibition and when they've seen your works?
I hope that they will question what reality is and think of, like, just be a little bit philosophical about life and so I hope they will be a bit tricked of what they see and try to figure out how the image was created.
Interesting. I bet you all are aching to see the show now.
There is one more question here.
Excellent.
Yeah, sorry, I had a question. I was just at the back. My question is to Henriette. So your title of the exhibition is Kaleidoscope, which means looking through one lens and then using the same pieces to create like an infinity of different images. So I was just wondering, there had to have been a choice why you chose this as your title. So what do you think the pieces in your creation are what elements would you call the pieces of the kaleidoscope that always present themselves in all of those images? Like, that you always rearrange, like what is always there?
So like the images that kind of represents my work, or? Yeah. I would probably say some of my images from feminine development of the female bodies. I think is very central in my work. It's a difficult question. I could name many, but probably those, like the female body. I think it's like a center of my work.
Excellent question. Thank you. All right, guys. You are all welcome to visit the whole museum, of course. The new exhibitions that you're the first ones to see tonight are on floor 3. Yes. So second floor up, you have the big Elliot Erwitt exhibition that's been up for a while, if you haven't seen that already. And then on the third floor, you have the new Bruce Gilden exhibition called YDs with the American street artist, who we will have a curator talk on Saturday at 3. With Jessica Jarl, who's curated the show, will be here if you're interested. And then on the same floor, of course, Henriette's fantastic exhibition, Kaleidoscope. So please welcome upstairs. And also, if you're interested, Henriette will sign books and posters. If you're interested in getting one of her fantastic works home with you, just on the table here behind you to the left. So thank you all for coming tonight to listen. Thank you, Henriette. Thank you, Anniki, for being on stage tonight and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you.